Before marrying Robert Sterling, a friend asked him who the woman he loved most deeply was. He lit a cigarette, silent for a few seconds. She's married now. Talking about her wouldn't be good for her reputation. Then, being with Eleanor for so long, didn't you ever feel anything for her? Robert Sterling smiled faintly. She's quiet, docile, with a reputable family background. She's the most suitable person to be Mrs. Sterling. The day before the wedding, the quiet, docile future Mrs. Sterling woke up in the bed of the groom's best friend, the flush of pleasure not yet faded from her eyes. Blake Harrison, I really like this wedding gift. Blake Harrison smiled, pulling her into his embrace. Since you like it so much, how about we do it again? As I entered the elevator, I glanced up at myself. My skin was smooth, my features understated, but my pupils were dark. I was the type of person who wasn't stunning at first glance. But if I smiled, a pair of dimples would appear at the corners of my lips, adding a touch of playfulness. I thought of what my best friend, Sarah Jenkins, had said, "You really are glowing. Don't you think you've been in amazing spirits lately, getting more and more beautiful?" I couldn't help but lightly touch my face. The wedding was in 3 weeks. I was marrying Robert Sterling. The joy I couldn't hide felt like bubbles overflowing like champagne. They burst in tiny fragments, filling my entire heart. I walked out of the elevator with a light step. The private room door not far away was ajar. Laughter and chatter grew closer. Returning to Havenwood a day early, I hadn't told Robert Sterling. I wanted to give him a surprise. My heels sinking into the soft carpet, my footsteps were quiet. No one inside the room noticed me outside the door. They were deep in lively conversation. "Oh, by the way, Robert, you still haven't answered my question. After all these years, how many women have you loved most deeply?" This is truth or dare, remember? You can't lie, not one word. I stopped in my tracks instinctively. Even my breathing unconsciously grew shallow. Robert Sterling had his back to the door. I could only vaguely see his profile. He lit a cigarette and was silent for a few seconds more. Then he slowly spoke. "1. How deeply?" Robert Sterling gave a light laugh. "I almost broke ties with my parents over her back then. I was even prepared to struggle with her for the rest of my life. I lived in a rented room with her for 3 months, eating instant noodles until I felt sick. I sold my watch for her birthday, and she got angry and yelled at me, then cried and threw herself on me and kissed me." His voice grew lower and lower. "I watched her get an abortion in a small clinic. At that moment, I truly, desperately wanted to marry her." Holy crap! Who was that? To make you love her like that? Robert Sterling shook his head slightly. "She's married now. Talking about her wouldn't be good for her reputation." With that, he picked up the glass of wine/drink in front of him and drained it in one gulp. Then he poured himself another full glass. "I saw her once last year. She wasn't doing too well. I gave her a sum of money, and we stayed at a hotel for 3 days. She cried when we parted." Robert Sterling drank another glass of wine, and said softly, "At that moment, I almost wanted to dissolve my engagement with Eleanor. I leaned against the wall, feeling a chill seep into my limbs. I remembered clearly when he unexpectedly went incommunicado for 3 days last year. I was so worried, I didn't get a single good night's sleep for 3 days. But while I was consumed with worry for him, he was spending 3 days and 3 nights at a hotel with his old flame. I almost felt nauseous enough to throw up. Then, being with Eleanor for so long, did you truly never feel anything for her?" He leaned back in his chair, smiling dismissively. "Veli. She's beautiful, docile, with a reputable family background, but her personality is quiet and uninteresting. She's the most suitable person to be Mrs. Sterling. Yeah, Eleanor really is faultless. Being faultless is precisely what makes her uninteresting. If you dislike her so much, then break off the engagement," someone suddenly interjected, his tone mocking. "Blake?" Robert Sterling sounded a little surprised. Blake Harrison gave a cold laugh. "It's their family who's climbing up to yours anyway. What are you afraid of?" There was a moment of awkward silence. Someone quickly tried to smooth things over. "The wedding date is set. Talking about this now is meaningless. Besides, Eleanor is a really good person. Robert's past is just that, past history. Come on, let's drink, let's drink. Don't bring up that old news. Robert Sterling frowned. Are you fired up about something? Or is your father pressuring you to marry, and you're taking it out on me? Blake Harrison put down his glass of wine/drink. Do you think I'd be pressured into marriage? Then where's all this pent-up anger coming from? How about this, buddy, I'll find you a girl? You can blow off some steam? Blake Harrison also laughed. Okay, but you have to pick someone I approve of. Tell me, what type are you looking for? Blake Harrison leaned back in his chair, his posture casual and unrestrained. Even if I told you, you couldn't find her. Robert Sterling seemed determined. I'm going to find her for you today no matter what. Just tell me. Blake Harrison slowly lifted his eyes to look at Robert Sterling. Unlike Robert Sterling's refined handsomeness, he exuded a lazy, decadent masculinity that was more potent than the strongest liquor. Well, unfortunately, she's married too. Robert Sterling froze, then suddenly swore under his breath. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Blake Harrison didn't reply, and after a while, he gave a self-mocking low. GH. Enough talk. Let's drink. He filled his glass of wine/drink and drank it down. The lively chatter resumed. The topic was also tacitly shifted. In the end, I didn't push the door open and go in. Questioning, arguing, entanglement. None of it had any meaning. The men would think it was just something that happened before the wedding, harmless. The elders would think I was making a big fuss over nothing, that nothing was more important than the alliance between the two families. I walked unsteadily on the carpet, my heels sinking in. Not until I was in the elevator, leaning against the cold elevator wall, did the few phrases of Robert Sterling still echo in my ears. She's beautiful, docile, quiet, uninteresting. She's the most suitable person to be Mrs. Sterling. I suddenly smiled soundlessly, looking at myself in the mirror again. My features were still understated, but my pupils were no longer bright. No matter how hard I tried, the dimples at the corners of my lips wouldn't appear. This was the plain, monochromatic Eleanor Vance, like sweet white porcelain. The quiet, docile Eleanor Vance, without temper or personality. She was the perfect tool for a strategic marriage, cultivated by her family. A tool whose joys and sorrows no one would care about. At 5 in the afternoon, Robert Sterling drove over to my home to pick me up for dinner. My parents were smiling warmly and happily. My sisters at home looked at me with joy and envy as I came downstairs wearing new jewelry. This set of jewelry was delivered by Robert Sterling specifically that morning. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. If I said I wanted to break off the engagement now, I would instantly be branded a sinner by both families. I looked at Robert Sterling. He was still handsome, dashing, and unparalleled in charm. His eyes were filled with tenderness as he looked at me. My best friend once told me, it's good enough if a man is willing to put on a show. Hopefully, they can keep the act up their whole lives. Because all relationships, all marriages, end up the same in the end. Eleanor. Robert Sterling extended his hand to me. He was smiling, but deep in his eyes was indifference. As soon as I saw the set of jewelry, I knew it was perfect for you. He held my hand, his eyes full of admiration. I let him put his arm around me, saying goodbye to my family with practiced grace. He politely escorted me into the car. Then we went to that expensive and terrible restaurant. Just halfway through the meal, his phone suddenly vibrated. I watched him pick up the phone, his expression changing slightly. My heart was as clear as a mirror, reflecting his ridiculousness and my sorrow. I put down my knife and fork and asked softly, "Is something wrong?" "Sorry, Eleanor, it's something about the company." He hesitated, looking at me with a hint of difficulty, as if waiting for me to say the answer he wanted. "Then you should go quickly. Company matters are important." He frowned, looked at his watch, and said, "No rush, I'll take you back first." "It's fine, you go ahead. I was planning to go to the mall with Sarah later anyway." Robert Sterling seemed to sigh in relief. All right, then make sure you let me know when you get home, he said, standing up, then leaned down and lightly kissed my forehead. I'll spend the whole weekend with you. I didn't go to the mall. I just walked aimlessly on the street. As a child, I was a good girl. As an adult, I was a model socialite. I felt like I was wrapped in layer upon layer of thick cocoons, suffocating, unable to break free. There was a string in my heart that had been pulled taut for over 20 years. When that string was strangling me, I suddenly remembered the WeChat message Sarah Jenkins sent me a few days ago. Her younger boyfriend had taken her speeding on the racetrack on his motorcycle. She said, "Eleanor, I've been married for 3 years, and this is the first time I've felt so free. Those men can keep a mistress, why should we be stuck in a sexless marriage? Eleanor, seize the day." I also went to that racing club. Preparation work was complete, and as the instructor was leading me over, someone suddenly called my name. Eleanor Vance? Surprised, I turned around and saw Blake Harrison leaning against a motorcycle. He was taking off his helmet, pushing his hair back from his forehead. His eyes and brows were sharp, yet held a wild, untamed quality. I nodded politely, about to leave. But Blake Harrison spoke again. "You want to learn?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes." He glanced at the instructor. "I'll teach her. You can go." I was a little surprised, looking at Blake Harrison. He leaned against the motorcycle, broad-shouldered and long-legged, his figure tall and strong. An intensely masculine aura washed over me. I instinctively looked away, but couldn't help biting my lip lightly. For some reason, I felt a little flustered. "Let's go. I'll take you for a couple of laps first." Blake Harrison picked up a helmet and handed it to me. I had intended to refuse, but when his long, strong hand reached out to me, I inexplicably took the helmet. After sitting down, I kept as much distance as possible from Blake Harrison. He propped himself up with one long leg on the ground, buckling his helmet strap, and glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Want to fly off later? Hold on to my waist." I bit my lip again, reached out, and lightly grabbed his racing suit. Blake Harrison chuckled, but didn't say anything else. He clearly took it easy on the first lap. On the second lap, he gradually picked up speed. When we were flying, I was so scared I plastered myself against his back, holding tightly onto his waist. Beneath my arms, his hot, hard muscles tensed instantly. The fierce wind howled past us. Blake Harrison's slightly hoarse voice was carried to my ears by the wind. "Eleanor Vance." He coughed lightly. "You're holding on a little too tight." I suddenly realized what he meant, but couldn't let go because of the extreme speed. I could only try my best to hunch my shoulders, trying to avoid that overly intimate touch. But Blake Harrison suddenly slowed down, stopping at the end of the racetrack. He took off his helmet and turned to lift me off the motorcycle. It was my first time experiencing racing, and my legs were shaky when I got off. Blake Harrison reached out and steadily held my waist. "Eleanor Vance." The surrounding light wasn't very bright. Even through my goggles, I clearly saw the smoldering fire in his eyes. It was a look I had never seen on Robert Sterling's face. An intensely possessive desire. I couldn't help but step back. But the large hand holding my waist suddenly tightened. I instinctively stepped forward, stumbling into Blake Harrison's arms. Click! The buckle on my helmet was undone by him. When the helmet was removed, the wind instantly scattered my hair. I instinctively tilted my head back, wanting to lift my hand to smooth it. But Blake Harrison was faster. His slightly calloused fingers brushed away the tangled strands by my temples. As I came back to my senses and tried to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed me directly. He kissed me decisively, forcefully, as if there was no possibility of me resisting or pushing him away. My lips were parted, my tongue captured by his. His kissing technique was a little clumsy, which made me hurt slightly. When I frowned, his movements slowed down. His large, slightly rough hands cupped my face. His fingertips brushed my cheeks and the sides of my ears, instantly sending currents of electricity through me. He picked me up again and placed me on the motorcycle. His strong, tall body fit against mine. like a volcano about to erupt, suppressing everything. My heart pounded rapidly, yet I felt flustered and helpless. When his kiss fell again, tears slowly welled up in my eyes. Eleanor Vance. Blake Harrison kissed the tears on my face. His voice was gentler than I had ever heard it. Are you unhappy today? Tears in my eyes, I turned my face away. But his hands followed, cupping my face, unwilling to let go. My eyelashes trembled, and tears slid down my cheeks into his palms. Yet I stubbornly refused to admit it. I'm just hungry. I ate terrible food tonight, didn't eat enough, and I feel awful. He was startled for a moment, then looked at me and smiled. He lowered his head again and kissed away the tears on my eyelashes. Let's go. I'll take you somewhere to eat something good. Are we writing this? It's cold tonight, I'll drive. He naturally took my hand. I tried to pull away, but couldn't. He held on tighter. Just as we got into the car, Blake Harrison's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at me, and answered. Robert, what's up? Calling you out for drinks. Robert Sterling's voice sounded a little low. Blake Harrison smirked, his voice filled with unconcealed pleasure. Got plans tonight. You should find Ethan and the others. What plans could a single guy like you possibly have? Hurry up and get over here. Can't do it, really. I have plans, Blake Harrison said, casually turning on the music. He turned to ask me, what kind of music do you want to listen to? Before I could even speak, Robert Sterling exploded on the other end. Blake Harrison, who are you asking? You didn't bring a girl, did you? Blake Harrison didn't admit it, but he didn't deny it either. Robert Sterling was clearly intrigued. No way, didn't you say your crush is married? You didn't take someone else's wife out, did you? Blake Harrison raised an eyebrow and lightly said, yeah. Holy crap. Robert Sterling's voice rose a notch. Don't tell me you're being a homewrecker. Black. E. Harrison glanced sideways at me. If it's her, being a homewrecker isn't out of the question. No, are you serious? You're really on a date with someone else's wife? Which poor guy is so unlucky that you're cuckolding him? Blake Harrison chose a cheerful song, then slowly asked, you really want to know? Hell yeah, tell me already. Who's this angel that's got you, Prince Harrison, willing to be a homewrecker? Can't say. Blake Harrison leaned back in the car seat, a hint of a rogue smile on his lips. She's married now. Talking about her wouldn't be good for her reputation. Robert Sterling was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, he was still half doubting. No, is this something you made up to mess with me, or is this for real? I've known you this long, how come I haven't heard a word about it? You've kept things pretty tight-lipped too, Blake Harrison retorted with a cold laugh. Besides, is it something to brag about? That's true. Robert Sterling sounded a little sheepish. Gotta go. Catch up another time. All right, I won't keep you from your passionate night. After hanging up, he started the car and asked me, what do you want to eat? I looked out at the night scenery through the car window, my mind filled with random thoughts. I had heard most of their conversation just now, but I didn't really believe it. Blake Harrison came from a good background and had an arrogant personality. He was uniquely wild and unruly, even in the most exclusive circles in Havenwood. His father had certainly given him a hard time with his cane. If he liked someone, there was no way he would have watched her get married. Why he made up such a lie, I couldn't figure out. But it didn't concern me anyway. Perhaps this would be the only time we'd cross paths. Let's go near C University. There's a food street there I loved going to when I was in school. Okay. As he stepped on the gas pedal, Blake Harrison glanced at me again. Buck. Clee up. I quickly looked down to check. My loose long hair fell down, swaying onto his arm. I lifted my hand to push my hair back. But I suddenly saw a white camellia hair tie in the center console compartment. It looked familiar, because I also had a pair of such hair ties. I accidentally lost one later. But these hair ties weren't rare. They were popular online for a while last year. So, It was probably just left behind by one of Blake Harrison's dates. I slowly straightened up, looking calmly ahead, but I couldn't help but lift my hand and rub my slightly swollen lips with the back of it. But when he kissed me just now, he was clearly clumsy. I didn't know why such a strange thought popped into my head. I couldn't help but shake my head lightly in self-mockery. What did it have to do with me? Tonight was just a fleeting, indulgent dream I was having. Eleanor Vance. Huh? Don't you have anything you want to ask me? Blake Harrison glanced sideways at me, then looked back at the road ahead. My gaze fell on his large hand gripping the steering wheel. His hand was attractive, with defined knuckles, rough and strong. It didn't look like the pampered hand of a privileged young master. I have a thing for hands. Thinking of the scene earlier when he held my waist and kissed me, I couldn't help but wonder, if he clasped both hands together, they should fit perfectly around my waist. You're not going to ask me who that person was? I asked subconsciously. Who was it? Blake Harrison smiled. Who do you think? I sat stunned for a while, then a buzzing sound suddenly filled my ears. Even the cheerful music gradually faded away. The red light was on, a long 78 seconds. The car stopped. Blake Harrison reached out and lightly took my hand. Eleanor Vance, I was originally planning to take this secret to my grave. If I hadn't seen you here tonight. Why? Blake Harrison didn't answer, just held my hand very tightly. Why? Oh, you unhappy today? How did you know I was unhappy? You're not like this when you're happy. He turned to look at me. Eleanor Vance, when you came in earlier, you were like a lost soul. Like a porcelain vase teetering on a shelf. If I hadn't called out to you, you would have fallen and shattered. My nose suddenly stung, and tears streamed down uncontrollably. He let go of my hand, cupped my face, and tried to kiss away my tears. But the traffic light turned green, and the cars behind us started honking frantically. His expression instantly turned annoyed. But I couldn't help but laugh. Just drive. Blake Harrison still found a place to pull over. He unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned over, and cupped my face. Eleanor Vance, don't cry in front of me. I can't even cry? Blake Harrison slowly lowered his head and kissed my wet face. I can't stand it. Eleanor Vance, I can't stand seeing you cry the most. His kiss moved downwards, landing on my swollen lips. It won't hurt you this time. You haven't kissed anyone before, Blake Harrison? He didn't answer, just suddenly deepened the kiss. That night, Blake Harrison took me to that food street. He stayed with me and ate from start to finish. I hadn't touched street food like that in a long time. I wanted to try everything, but I couldn't finish it all. In the end, Blake Harrison ate the leftovers. Afterward, he drove me home. When we were a few minutes away from my place, I asked him to stop the car. Blake Harrison, I ate a lot of things I really wanted to eat tonight. I'm not as sad now. Thank you so much for staying with me tonight. But, no buts, Eleanor Vance. There's usually nothing good after a but. Blake Harrison didn't look at me. He just stared calmly at the dark night ahead and the empty street. The look on his face was no longer the wild, sharp expression I was familiar with. After a while, he gave a self-mocking laugh. You should go. I lowered my head and glanced again at the white camellia hair tie. I lightly pursed my lips. Okay, I'm going. Drive carefully on your way back. The car door opened, and I got out. When I closed the door, I didn't dare to look back. Not until I had walked a few steps did I. Couldn't help but turn back for a look. The car window was rolled down, and Blake Harrison and I met each other's gaze. He just looked at me like that, with a calm exterior, but a surging undercurrent. That intensely possessive desire seemed about to burst forth. I turned around in a panic, walking quickly forward as if fleeing. I was a coward. I didn't have the courage to fight against my entire family and society's expectations. I didn't dare, like a love-struck teenager, to easily place a bet on a man. I could only look at the pit of misery before me, close my eyes, and jump in. The wedding date gradually approached. Robert Sterling's mood seemed to be getting worse and worse. 2 days before the wedding, while discussing some wedding reception details at my home, he was constantly on the phone. My parents and relatives and I were sitting in the living room. Robert Sterling talked on the phone for a long time on the patio outside. My parents were eager to please their prize catch. They kept urging me to go out and bring him tea and snacks. The first time I went out, Robert Sterling was a little impatient, but his attitude was still gentle. The second time I was urged to bring him tea, just as I lightly called his name, he suddenly turned around, his face full of irritation, his voice harsh. "I said I don't need it. What the hell is wrong with you?" As the words fell, he raised his hand and knocked away the teacup in my hand. The birds in the birdcage nearby were startled and flapped their wings, afraid to chirp. The teacup shattered, tea splashed everywhere, and my hand was scalded and red in one spot. But that slight pain was nothing compared to the heavy blow to my heart. It was like a sharp chisel being hammered into flesh and blood. The lively chatter behind me stopped as well. My parents looked panicked. My relatives had varying expressions. My sisters, who used to bicker over a beautiful dress, were all pale, looking at me helplessly and worriedly. My back was burning hot. My teeth dug into the soft flesh of my lips, almost biting them until they bled. The tea had soaked the hem of my dress and his pants. Through his ongoing phone call, I could hear a woman constantly calling his name. Robert Sterling finally snapped back to attention. But he frowned first. After a moment, a look of annoyance appeared on his face. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, I shouldn't have yelled at you just now. You weren't scalded, were you?" He put away his phone and reached for my hand. But I instinctively took a step back. Robert Sterling's face instantly darkened. My parents had come out at some point. Seeing the situation, they quickly nudged me. "Eleanor, Robert didn't mean it. It's normal for a young couple to have little spats. Don't be difficult." Then they smiled apologetically at Robert Sterling, gesturing for a servant to come and wipe the tea from his pants. Robert Sterling gave a fleeting, almost mocking smile. Although it was slight and brief, I clearly caught that smile. In that moment, I felt as if I had finally woken up. In Robert Sterling's eyes, I was no different from the birds in that cage. If he felt like it, he would give me a smile, say a few gentle words. When he was in a bad mood, yelling and hitting me would be normal. Even with my parents and family standing right there, he never showed an ounce of consideration or care. If I married him, this would be a scene that would play out on countless ordinary days in the future. And this, perhaps, was just the most insignificant beginning. "All right, everyone stop fussing." Robert Sterling waved the servants away. My parents stood aside, cautious and anxious. Robert Sterling didn't look at them, reaching out to pull me towards him. "Go change. We're going out for a party tonight." He was pleasant and gentle, back to being affectionate and considerate. My parents seemed to breathe a huge sigh of relief, laughing and agreeing with him. I wanted to pull my hand away from his. I wanted to tear off the nauseating mask on his face. But in the end, I didn't. I just nodded quietly and docilely, like the Eleanor Vance I had always been, without temper or emotion, and turned to go upstairs and change. After changing into a new dress, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my hair. The mirror reflected a face as pale as a fluorescent light, but my cheeks were burning red. My features were still understated, but in my dark pupils, a flicker of fire was brewing. I knew. This tiny spark was about to ignite a wildfire. I picked up my phone. In WeChat, the messages Blake Harrison had sent me were still lying quietly in the chat box. The last one was him asking me, "Eleanor Vance, I want to send you a wedding gift. Do you dare to accept it?" I hadn't replied to him. It had been over 2 weeks since he sent the message. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I sent a message back to Blake Harrison, "Are you going to the party tonight?" He replied after a moment, "You want me to go, so I should just go?" I was startled for a moment, then laughed. "Fine, don't go." A few minutes later, Blake Harrison replied, "Eleanor Vance, can't you ask me just one more time?" I couldn't help but smile. "So, are you coming tonight?" He was reserved for a few seconds. "If you're coming, I'm coming." The chat box kept showing typing. But after a long time, he only replied with one word, okay. When Robert Sterling and I arrived, most of our friends were already there. But Blake Harrison was nowhere to be seen. I sat beside Robert Sterling, like his insignificant shadow. And he, clearly satisfied with my obedience and proper demeanor today, poured me a teacup of tea himself. As he handed it over, his handsome face had a rare, genuine smile. He lowered his voice and said, "Wife, this cup of tea is my apology." My stomach churned, but I managed to force a faint smile. I reached out and took it, taking a small sip. Robert Sterling smiled smugly. He leaned back in his chair comfortably, one arm resting on the back of the chair behind me, putting it around me in a show of affection. Just then, Blake Harrison pushed the door open and walked in. I instinctively looked up. His gaze fell on my face too, but only for a brief moment before he looked away. I slowly lowered my head. He seemed to have just gotten a haircut. The new hairstyle was a bit short, but sharply styled, making his features look even more prominent and defined. He seemed to have lost some weight too. He was wearing a black windbreaker and cargo pants, which made him look even taller and leaner. His presence was even more sharp and unruly. He didn't look like he was coming to a friend's party. He looked like he was going into a brawl. I lifted my hand and cooled my burning ears with the back of it. Robert Sterling had already started asking, "Where have you been lately? Haven't seen you in half a month." Blake Harrison found a single sofa and sat down, sprawling his long legs out a little wildly. Hearing this, he lifted his eyelids and glanced at Robert Sterling. "Busy? On a date again?" Robert Sterling asked teasingly. Everyone immediately got interested. "What date? With whom? Are you two speaking in riddles? Let him tell you himself." Blake Harrison curved his lips, his gaze sweeping over me before settling on Robert Sterling's face. "How about you tell them with me?" Robert Sterling's expression changed. He glanced at me instinctively and immediately changed the subject. When men get together, it's usually about bragging and drinking. These privileged young masters were no exception. I lowered my head, idly stirring the soup in my bowl. My phone vibrated. I glanced at Robert Sterling, who was drinking, and quietly opened my phone. "Blake Harrison, what happened to your hand?" I looked at the slightly red area on the back of my hand. There were no blisters, no peeling skin. That's why my family and Robert Sterling hadn't even asked about it. I didn't expect Blake Harrison to notice. A faint ache welled up in my chest. I accidentally scalded it. "Did you put any ointment on it? Does it still hurt?" "It's fine, it doesn't hurt much anymore." Blake Harrison replied after a while. "Eleanor Vance, have you been habitually sacrificing yourself like this all these years?" I couldn't help but look up at Blake Harrison. Beneath his sharp features, there was a contrasting hint of tenderness. My heart skipped a beat. Before this, I had very little contact with Blake Harrison. We met for the first time at my engagement party with Robert Sterling. Now I realized, belatedly, that Robert Sterling and I had a minor disagreement that day too. At the time, I thought it was my fault, that I had bothered him. Actually, the reason he was bothered was probably because of the woman he loved so deeply. But I was kept in the dark back then, completely unaware. So Robert Sterling just placated me a little, and I quickly became happy again. That day was the first time I had drunk alcohol. When I was slightly tipsy, the other side of me, usually suppressed, revealed itself slightly. The atmosphere at the evening banquet was lively, and I was encouraged to dance with several of Robert Sterling's friends. Only Blake Harrison didn't dance with me. Just after I finished dancing, Mrs. Sterling had someone call me over. Although she tried to be considerate, she still lectured me with a stern face. When I went back out, I didn't dare to smile or make noise. I sat quietly and properly to the side. I remember. Blake Harrison seemed to have asked me something then. "Why aren't you having fun anymore?" "I'm a little tired," I forced a smile. I didn't dare reveal my fear and feelings of being wronged. Blake Harrison didn't say anything else. Naturally, I wouldn't talk to him either. He seemed unapproachable. He exuded the wildness and defiance ingrained from a wealthy family background. an arrogance that made him look down on everyone. Robert Sterling said he was notoriously wild and difficult. Naturally, I had a bit of a prejudice against him. But later, he brought me a cup of warm honey water. "Drink this. You'll feel better." I didn't refuse, taking it and sipping it slowly. But at the time, I thought, ridiculously, how much better it would have been if Robert Sterling had given me this cup of honey water. The party was only halfway through when Robert Sterling's phone started ringing frequently again. The time he spent outside taking calls also grew longer and longer. Later, he simply didn't come back at all. He just called me with a perfunctory excuse, saying he had an urgent matter and would have his driver take me home. I hadn't even managed to say anything before he hung up. But right after that, I received a message from an unknown number. There was only a pregnancy report and an abortion appointment slip. I looked at these things, and somehow remained perfectly still. I just thought, oh, in my heart. So that's why Robert Sterling had been so bothered lately. It was because she was pregnant with his child again, and she was going to abort their child again. I saved the messages. I picked up my bag and stood up. As I walked towards the exit, I sent a message to Blake Harrison, "I'm leaving. Are you?" Blake Harrison drove me back to his villa in the outskirts of Havenwood. On the way, he stopped and bought a few tubes of ointment. There was one for burns, and one for pain relief and soothing. "Put some on. It'll feel better. AF." He handed me the ointment. We didn't talk much the rest of the way. The car drove from the bustling city center towards the empty, distant suburbs. I looked out the car window at the dark blue sky, without stars. My mind was blank. I felt like I was in a small boat, drifting with the current. It didn't matter where I went, or whether I stopped or not. I didn't want to care about anything anymore. The suffocating cocoon that bound me was making me feel like I was drowning. I just wanted to break free, even just once. The car stopped. Blake Harrison came around and opened the car door for me. We still didn't speak, but he took my hand. We walked quietly like that through the small garden and lawn, to the light gray house. Blake Harrison stopped walking. He turned and looked at me. "Eleanor Vance, if you regret it now, it's not too late." His voice sounded calm and composed, but the emotion in his eyes was one of absolute, determined possession. I suddenly tilted my head and smiled. Taking a step forward, I leaned closer and looked at his face. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his Adam's apple was moving violently up and down. He probably didn't know how tightly he was holding my hand. His palm was covered in fine sweat. He was very, very nervous. "Are you nervous, Blake Harrison?" He shook his head, then swore softly under his breath, but ultimately nodded and admitted it. I pulled my hand free from his. Blake Harrison instinctively tried to take it back. But I stood on tiptoe, put my arms around his neck, and kissed him first. It was pathetic that my first boyfriend, who was also my fiancé and groom-to-be, Mr. Robert Sterling, was not a virgin. So I didn't have much experience in that area. And Robert Sterling didn't really like me. After we got engaged, although we had sex, it was only a few times, and always rushed. In terms of sex, I had some experience, but not much. But facing Blake Harrison, I thought who'd be enough. However, reality always differed from imagination. We kissed our way from downstairs to the master bedroom on the second floor. As soon as the bedroom door closed, Blake Harrison impatiently pulled off my thin knit cardigan. It was late summer, so I was only wearing a thin knit bodycon camisole dress underneath. The dress was very stretchy and the color was a creamy white, like jade. It almost blended with my skin. I wasn't very tall, and I had a small frame. My waist was thin enough, but my chest wasn't particularly full. Robert Sterling had joked about it before, so I often felt a bit insecure about my bust size. But Blake Harrison's reaction pleased me. He pressed me against the back of the door, kissing me with a rushed, uncontrollably rough intensity. I lightly hit him and bit him. He gasped violently, his kisses falling on my ear. "Eleanor, you're just like this jade gourd." His sudden remark caught me off guard. It wasn't until he lightly bit my earlobe that I remembered I was wearing a pair of jade gourd earrings today. lustrous white jade, delicately carved. My cheeks immediately flushed. As I was momentarily distracted, Blake Harrison put his arm around my waist and pulled me tightly into his embrace. Our bodies pressed together. Softness against hardness. Like perfectly fitted dovetail joints. He lowered his head and buried his face in my cool, dark hair, pulling my body tighter, even tighter, against his chest. Eleanor, when you held on to me from behind that day, did you know what I was thinking? What were you thinking? At that moment, my mind was filled with filthy thoughts. I wanted to kiss you, wanted to sleep with you, wanted it like crazy. I hit him again. Blake Harrison chuckled softly in my ear. Eleanor, don't believe all that ridiculous self-help nonsense. A man who doesn't desire you isn't truly in love with you. He gently pushed me away and cupped my face again. The possessive desire in his eyes was stronger each time, undisguised. His burning gaze, so intense I couldn't look away, made me tremble slightly all over. But deep within my body, a wild longing surged. The thick cocoon was cracking, the gaps growing wider and wider. My eyelashes fluttered, and I slowly closed my eyes. The world spun as Blake Harrison lifted me and pressed me down onto the large bed. Actually, during the previous times we had kissed and embraced, I had already clearly felt how well endowed he was. I couldn't help but feel a little scared. But what I never expected was, as soon as he took off my dress, before we were even fully naked against each other, he had just held me and kissed those little jade gourds of mine, when his expression suddenly changed. Then, I smelled that strange, musk-like scent. I was stunned for a moment, then couldn't help but laugh. Blake Harrison, I was laughing so hard I couldn't catch my breath, so I didn't notice at all that the desire in his eyes had become terrifying, like a raging storm. Eleanor Vance. He whispered my name hoarsely. His hot large hand gripped my waist and flipped me over. Again. He leaned down, his hot, hard chest pressed against my thin back. Amidst my messy hair, he kissed my shoulder. Eleanor. His voice was somehow shy and annoyed. Looking at you, I can't control myself. This time, we'll use this position. But he clearly overestimated himself again. Fortunately, at least this time lasted 10 minutes. I couldn't help wanting to laugh again. Blake Harrison kissed me forcefully, threatening me with a false show of strength. Eleanor, don't laugh. Okay, I won't laugh. I lightly held him, my fingertips tracing over the tight, taut muscles of his back, then dropping to his narrow waist. Blake Harrison had an amazing physique. Much better muscles than Robert Sterling. He wasn't just for show, his lean, sculpted muscles were built through hard work. I couldn't take my hands off his abs. So much so that when he quickly regrouped, I didn't react at all. Eleanor. Blake Harrison picked me up and sat me on top of him. He lowered his head and kissed my thin eyelids. Like a good, obedient student, he said very seriously, I'll last longer this time, to make you feel good. I didn't take it seriously at the time. I even smiled and nodded. Okay. But soon, I couldn't smile anymore. The third time, Blake Harrison was an absolute perpetual motion machine. What was even more terrifying was that he quickly mastered many techniques. No longer just thrusting straight forward like before. The little jade gourds by my ears seemed to be caught in a gale, almost blurring with motion. My consciousness gradually grew hazy. I only heard Blake Harrison ask hoarsely in my ear, Eleanor, tell me, who am I? I answered groggily, Blake Harrison, you're Blake Harrison, Eleanor. Did you feel good this time? I opened my eyes with difficulty, and he kissed my swollen lips again. My answer, escaping through my lips, was broken and blurred. Yes, Blake Harrison, if it felt good, never leave me, okay? If I were 18, or 3 weeks ago, I might have believed promises like forever a little. But now, I just cupped Blake Harrison's face and kissed him. Isn't it enough that we're happy now? My body and soul were truly happy. But after it was all over, Blake Harrison held me and gave me a bath. Then he took his cigarette pack and went out to the terrace. I was too tired and didn't want to move from the bed. Blake Harrison seemed a little down. I could tell. But I didn't know what to say to him. Amidst these jumbled thoughts, I fell into a deep sleep. When I opened my eyes again, I was in Blake Harrison's arms. His arm was wrapped tightly around my waist. Even in his sleep, he held me very tightly. I didn't move, just watched him quietly for a long time. A faint feeling grew in my heart. I think I truly preferred Blake Harrison's rugged, masculine looks. It was just that our connection was too brief and too late. I gently moved his arm away, wanting to get out of bed. But Blake Harrison woke up too and immediately pulled me back into a tight embrace. Eleanor Vance, where are you going? I should go back. Go back and do what? Are you still going to marry him? I hadn't told Blake Harrison that I didn't want to marry Robert Sterling. And I wouldn't marry Robert Sterling. That was my own business. Not because I had sex with Blake Harrison, or because I thought I had a fallback plan. I just couldn't tolerate the sand. And I didn't want to hold on to a ridiculous hope, hoping that the long road ahead would grind the irritating sand into pearls. I gently pried open Blake Harrison's fingers. I turned back to look at him. The flush of pleasure was still in my eyes, but it was already tinged with a fading coolness. Blake Harrison, I really like this wedding gift. He also smiled faintly, reaching out and pulling me into his embrace again. Since you like it so much, how about we do it again? But I shook my head. I should go back. Today will be busy. There are a lot of small things to do. Eleanor Vance. Blake Harrison slowly sat up. You think this is the gift I wanted to give you? You think I just wanted a casual fling with you? As long as you say yes, I'll handle everything that comes after. But I don't need that. I looked at Blake Harrison calmly yet coolly. Let's just leave it here, okay? He looked at me quietly, his unruly eyes seeming to grow dim. It seemed like half a minute passed. Blake Harrison suddenly gave a self-mocking laugh. Then tell me, what did last night mean to you? Last night, I was very happy. Blake Harrison, consider it a favor I owe you. I stood up, fighting back the sudden surge of bitterness in my heart and forcing myself not to cry. I gave him a forced, casual smile and little. Why hugged him? If there's ever a chance in the future, I'll definitely repay you. I got dressed, quickly washed up, and left. Blake Harrison didn't stop me, nor did he chase after me. Downstairs, his driver was there. I didn't refuse and let him drive me home. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Tomorrow was my wedding to Robert Sterling. Everyone at home was happy. But in private, when my sisters pulled me aside to talk, they couldn't hide their worries. Sis, I used to envy you so much, I really wanted to get married. But now I don't want to at all. I don't think Robert Sterling is as good as I thought he was. I'm suddenly really scared of marriage. Sister, can you not marry him? My youngest sister handed me her favorite earrings. I won't compete with you for things anymore, sister. Just don't marry him. He's so fierce. He dared to yell at you and physically lash out at you in our own home. What if he hits you after you're married? I hugged my youngest sister tightly, and tears streamed down my face. I was the eldest sister in the family. Every girl in the family was raised and molded to follow my path. In their innocence, they saw their own future in me. That's why they felt the pain of seeing their own future and suddenly grew up. Don't worry about me. Sister has a plan. I stroked my youngest sister's soft hair. Trust me. On the wedding day, the weather was excellent. When Robert Sterling came to pick me up, he truly looked handsome, dashing, and full of spirit. My sisters cried buckets. But I was still carried into the wedding car by him, looking demurely shy. The motorcade drove towards the estate where the wedding was being held. As we drove through the open gates, outside the gates, a commotion suddenly arose. Robert Sterling frowned in displeasure and looked out the car window. But I lowered my head and lightly curved my lips. Inside the room, the atmosphere was intensely strained. Mrs. Sterling, W.H. O. had always been so high and mighty and rigid, was now pressing her lips together, her face pale with anger. Robert Sterling sat dejectedly on the sofa, a bruise on his forehead. Mr. Sterling's face was ashen, his hands clasped behind his back as he paced back and forth. On a joyous day like this, journalists from half the city's news media had flocked here. If at a time like this, the scandal of Robert Sterling having an affair with a married woman and getting her pregnant were to spread. Her husband, though not from a family as prominent as the Sterlings, had considerable assets and naturally couldn't swallow this humiliation. Now he had hired a crowd of people to broadcast their demands for justice live at the wedding venue. If I, the bride-to-be, also made a scene and broke off the engagement right then, the Sterling family would become the laughingstock of the entire city today. The auspicious time for the wedding is almost here. What should we do now? What should we do? Your good-for-nothing son did something so beastly, and you're asking me what to do? Mrs. Sterling looked as if she had aged 20 years in an instant. She didn't dare talk back and turned to me. Eleanor, I think there might be some misunderstanding. Who knows who put the idea in that bastard's head or led him on, deliberately trying to harm our family. Mr. Sterling sneered in anger. If your good son could control himself, would someone be able to harm our family? I told you from the start that woman Isabel was trouble, and you needed to cut ties with her. But you wouldn't listen. Now you've stirred up this mess. Are you clear-headed now? Robert Sterling leaned back on the sofa, saying nothing. Isabel Miller, the woman he loved so deeply, immediately got an abortion after the matter was exposed. She also cried and claimed he had threatened and forced her using old photos and videos from when they were dating. Robert Sterling had thought they were much in love, that she loved him desperately and couldn't forget him. In the end, he was slapped hard by the woman he loved. His entire state of mind was on the verge of collapse. I sat quietly to the side. What I was thinking was that Mrs. Sterling was indeed shrewd. She was actually right. Robert Sterling and Isabel Miller had an affair and she got pregnant, wanting to secretly give birth to the child and pass it off as her husband's. But Isabel Miller was also jealous and resentful, and secretly sent photos before the wedding, wanting to provoke me. And I hadn't gone to Isabel Miller. I just had someone find Isabel Miller's husband. His wife had cuckolded him like this. Naturally, the man couldn't swallow this humiliation. And they couldn't afford to provoke the Sterling family. So I had someone point him to this clear path. After it was done, he would take a massive payoff and dump Isabel Miller. And as for me, I slowly raised my eyes and looked at Mrs. Sterling. The auspicious time is almost here. If we delay any longer, things will be harder to resolve. How about this? I'll go and see that person. I'll talk to him. Actually, the Sterling family had already tried every possible way to talk to the man and mediate. But he was just playing rough, being completely uncooperative, refusing to see anyone or listen to anyone. However, he had let it be known that he was only willing to talk to the bride. The Sterling family was naturally too embarrassed to ask me. But now that I had brought it up myself, Mr. Sterling was overjoyed. Robert Sterling also immediately sat up straight. He looked touched and surprised. Eleanor, you're not angry with me? I raised my hand and pressed my slightly red eyes. Of course I'm angry, but the bigger picture is more important. I stood up and choked up. It's just that I have one condition. Mr. Sterling quickly said, "Good child, just name it. I'll agree to anything I can do." I nodded. "Then I'll go and try first. If it works out, I'll talk to you about it." Half an hour later, I returned, my eyelids slightly swollen from crying. "They're willing to settle the matter, saying it's out of sympathy for me being in the same boat," I said, choking back tears again. Mrs. Sterling quickly offered comfort. I cried for a while before stopping, then said with difficulty, "It's just that he's asking for quite a lot." "Give it to him, give it to him." Mr. Sterling made the final decision, then fiercely cursed Robert Sterling. "It's all because of you, you beast. After the wedding is over, I'll settle the score with you." Then he spoke to me gently. "Oh, and Eleanor, the condition you mentioned, just name it." I looked up at him and Mrs. Sterling. "My condition is very simple. I will cooperate to complete the wedding. And I ask that you, Mr. Sterling, fulfill your previous agreement to help the Vance family in business in the future." "Don't worry, I'll keep my word," Mr. Sterling said readily. 6 months from now, please allow me to dissolve my marriage with Robert Sterling. As for the reason for divorce, you can say whatever you like, as long as you don't slander me, I'll accept it." Regarding everything that happened today, I will also keep it a secret for life, but the Sterling family must give me a sum of compensation. Not to the Vance family, but to me, Eleanor Vance, alone. Robert Sterling suddenly stood up. Eleanor, what does this mean? My meaning is very clear. I am willing to help the Sterling family get through today's storm, settle the matter peacefully, let this wedding conclude successfully, and save face for everyone. But that is all I can do. If you agree, then we can sign a written agreement now. Robert Sterling looked at me for a long time as if he were seeing me for the first time, stunned. Mr. Sterling pondered for a long time, finally sighed deeply, and agreed. You're the one who's been wrong, Ed, in this matter, Eleanor. I agree. Mr. Sterling sighed again, shaking his head dejectedly. Robert is out of luck. Maybe his luck is yet to come. I smiled, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my heart, and breathed a heavy sigh of relief. The storm that had just passed blew over, leaving no trace. The wedding concluded successfully. The bride smiled quietly and sweetly throughout. But the groom seemed somewhat distracted the entire time. But no matter what, to the outside world, this was still a perfectly flawless wedding. After the wedding, Robert Sterling and I moved into the marital home. But we had been separated since our wedding night. Actually, at first, Robert Sterling had thought about trying to improve our marital relationship. He did treat me with more care than before. But after hitting a few walls, he seemed to have abandoned that idea. As for my wedding day, Blake Harrison didn't attend the wedding. I haven't seen him since. Occasionally, I would hear news of him always traveling around beautiful islands. Once at a friend's gathering, someone mentioned him. They called him on video right then. He was sea fishing at the time. He was much tanner, and a little thinner. But his muscles were even more solid and impressive. He was casually wearing a black tank top and cargo pants, a cigarette in his mouth, lying on the deck. He appeared on the phone screen, completely wild and unrestrained. Friends greeted him one by one. When the camera passed over me, I smiled at him too. Hi. Blake Harrison seemed to look at me deeply, or perhaps he just casually glanced away. I slowly lowered my eyelashes. The camera quickly moved away from my face. I didn't seem to hear what else my friends talked about with him. Just like he had that day, I also poured myself a glass of wine/drink. The video call ended. Someone laughed. Blake Harrison, he really lives like a king. Unlike us, we're all like donkeys tied to a millstone, with no freedom at all. He's not getting married, isn't his father throwing a fit? Thinking about that just makes me laugh. A while back, his father was urging him to get married again, and he just blurted out that he was gay and didn't like women. Mr. Harrison almost died of anger, but then Blake added fuel to the fire, saying that if anyone pushed him to marry again, he'd bring his boyfriend home and come out completely. Tell me, who would dare to pressure him now? Is Blake Harrison really gay? Speaking of which, I actually really like his type. Robert Sterling chuckled. Gay my ass. He likes someone, but she's married. He's just being cynical because he can't have her. Who's this heavenly beauty? Holy crap. Seriously, I've known him forever, and he hasn't had a single girl around. What kind of woman is so amazing she managed to hook Prince Harrison like this? Don't know. He keeps it completely secret, afraid of affecting her. As soon as Robert Sterling spoke, everyone suddenly fell silent for a moment. Then someone abruptly changed the subject. I put down my glass of wine/drink and went to the restroom. Leaning against the sink, I took out my phone and looked. My conversation with Blake Harrison was still from 3 months ago. I had thanked him. I knew very well that the reason that matter went so smoothly was all due to Blake Harrison's doing behind the scenes. His true wedding gift to me was this one. I sent the message, and Blake Harrison didn't reply until late at night. He said, Eleanor Vance, what will you do when you're unhappy in the future? He wanted to give me freedom, to let me escape the pit of misery. But I didn't. I think in the end I was practical and self-interested. Perhaps I was just scared, or I had come to my senses. That's why I put the interests of the Vance family and myself before love. Or perhaps it was because I didn't want to get Blake Harrison caught up in the scandal. Because too many such stories that start with a bang often end up in a mess. I didn't want to hear him one day hysterically accuse me, "It's all because of you that I became estranged from my family and ruined my reputation." I wanted this short story between us to leave behind a little more good memory. Blake Harrison didn't know about my agreement with the Sterling family. He also didn't know that I would dissolve the marriage and leave the Sterling family 6 months later. He didn't know anything. He thought I was going to spend my whole life in that pit of misery. He thought I deeply loved Robert Sterling, and that's why I was willing to put up with it. Maybe he hated me, but in the end, he still worried about what I would do when I was unhappy. I don't remember how long I cried. I only fell into a daze and sleep when it was almost dawn. I dreamed of Blake Harrison. He was sitting astride a motorcycle, smiling wildly and freely. He said, "Eleanor Vance, let's go. I'll take you to elope. Do you dare?" The day I dissolved my marriage with Robert Sterling was still a beautiful day. He had been drunk the night before and was in bad shape. His hand was shaking when he signed the divorce papers. "Eleanor, can't we really start over?" A strange sadness welled up in my heart. You see, men's love is fleeting. The woman he loved so deeply was later utterly despised by him. Isabel Miller had a very bad time after her divorce. She had an accident and was being chased for debt, $2 million. She went to Robert Sterling, kneeling and begging, but he just found it annoying and kicked her away. Robert Sterling signed the papers. He seemed unwilling, but finally signed. The news of our divorce was not announced publicly yet. The Sterling family thought it was too soon, that it would cause outside speculation, and wanted to delay it a bit longer. I didn't mind. I just told them, if I start dating, I'll let you know in advance, and please prepare to announce it. After getting the divorce papers, I traveled around for a while. With my best friend, Sarah Jenkins. A few months earlier, she had also gotten divorced. Her ex-husband felt guilty towards her, and she received a very generous alimony. We went to many, many places. Domestic locations, overseas locations. For the last leg of the trip, Sarah had to return to domestic locations first. I went to Greece alone, to Santorini. Blake Harrison loved it there. I wasn't necessarily thinking of seeing him or having anything happen. But in my heart, I thought, if fate allowed, if he wasn't with anyone else, maybe it wouldn't be impossible. I walked along the coastline aimlessly. The sea breeze blew through my long hair that reached my waist. As I pushed back the tangled strands, I suddenly thought of that night in his car, the white camellia hair tie in the center console compartment, and a strand of my long hair that had fallen onto his arm. I looked at my wrist. I was also wearing a white camellia hair tie. I raised my hand and tied up my messy hair. I couldn't help but wonder, where was Blake Harrison now? What was he doing? Was he waiting for me? "Eleanor Vance, your hair looks better down." A voice, wild and unrestrained, yet incredibly familiar, suddenly spoke behind me. I froze, standing still. The sea breeze howled, waves rolled onto the shore, lapping at my calves. The whole world grew quiet. My creamy white knit dress was wet at the hem, clinging tightly to my body. The little white jade gourds dangling by my ears swayed in the sea breeze, catching in my hair. A man's strong yet rough hand untied my hair. His breath was hot, and his rhythm was slightly erratic. "Eleanor Vance, you did that on purpose, didn't you?" My mind was blank. I just asked dazedly, "What?" Wearing these jade gourd earrings. Dressed like a little jade gourd too, deliberately, trying to seduce me? I suddenly lowered my head and laughed. I laughed for a while, then turned around to face him. He was shirtless, his skin tanned to a wheat color, but he looked even more sensual and masculine. My gaze slid down his face inch by inch, landing on his toned chest, narrow waist, and perfectly aligned abs. He just stood there, letting me look him over. I tilted my head slightly and looked at his sharp features again. "Blake Harrison, you're not going to retreat so quickly again, are you?" He didn't get angry. After all, he had definitely proven himself capable in the end last time. "How about you try again?" He took a few steps towards me. My gaze was easily drawn to one particular area. His light gray loose swim trunks, the outline clearly visible in the wind. Gray really does make it look big. My ears burned, and my heart couldn't help but stir. But I said aloud, "Have you been practicing properly all this time?" Blake Harrison reached out and pulled me into his arms. He curved his lips. "Ask what you want directly. Don't beat around the bush." I lowered my eyelashes and bit my lip. After hesitating for a while, I finally spoke. "I heard you like men now." "Oh yeah. Why don't you ask it yourself?" Blake Harrison pressed me tightly against his chest. I heard his pounding heartbeat, and I felt the terrifying change in his body. "Eleanor Vance, did you hear its answer?" Blake Harrison cupped my face. I opened my eyes and saw that intensely naked possessive desire again. But this time, I wasn't scared. An unspeakable sweetness flowed slowly through my heart. I pursed my lips and smiled, my dimples appearing faintly at the corners of my mouth. "Blake Harrison, I heard it." "What did you hear?" He lowered his head and kissed me, starting with light pecks and gradually deepening. By the end, it felt like he wanted to devour me whole. My breathing grew more and more ragged, my answering voice carried away by the wind. It said, "It and you both missed me very much." The end.